Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to the webinar this morning and learn more about Changing Tide and the services that we have got going at the moment. So the structure for the webinar this morning, I'll just give you a little bit of background on who we are as an organisation and our backstory, the things that are really important to us, our values as an organisation and our mission. I'll run through the services that we have on offer and what we've got available in our services at the moment and where we've got some gaps if you've got participants that are looking for support. I'll look at our not-for-profit side of our business, and then we're going to look at our skills training and development program that's running at the moment, and Naomi's going to run us through that. So a little bit of background on Changing Tide. So we started as two sole traders. My husband, James, who's a disability and mental health support worker, had his own business. I, who work as a counsellor, had my own business. And we just found that there was so much crossover between what we were doing. So it made sense to come together. And that's how Changing Tide Wellness and Support Services was created. So as a private business, we still found it really important to connect with our community and do a lot of community-based initiatives. And we very quickly realized that if we wanted to, do those community initiatives to the scope that we wanted, we would need to look at how we were going to fund those alternatively from the private funding. So we made the decision to become a not-for-profit and become a registered charity. And that just allowed us to access different funding, different grants, and different opportunities to be able to really make the impact that we wanted to make in our community. So as an organisation, our biggest value and our biggest mission is around building skills and building capacity and building knowledge. So we want to be able to leave people that have worked with Changing Tide with a set of skills that they didn't have before. Sometimes the way that we frame it to our participants is if the NDIS funding was going to stop tomorrow and all of a sudden there was no more funding, what sort of things would you need to be able to continue to live a functional life? So we want to make sure that people have the skills and have the knowledge and really have that feeling of capacity and the confidence to be able to do those things. We believe in ethical practice. So we are a very ethical organisation. We really go out of our way to make sure that our participants are advocated for and that they're really getting the best use of their funding that's absolutely possible and using their funding in a way that's going to set them up if we weren't around anymore. Growth is our absolute goal. So we don't aim to be a huge organisation with offices all over the place. We definitely are a small business and we want to stay small, but we want to see growth in the people that we work with. So we will kind of grow ourselves as that need comes and as our participants are growing and the people that use our service are growing. So the services that we have available, so obviously we have our NDIS support. So we provide both disability and mental health support services. So we do that in the way of individual support, where our support workers will go out and work one-on-one with our participants. So that might be in the home. So like I said before, learning skills like being able to look after your home, cooking, cleaning, paying bills, all of those things that we all do within our home every day, but we kind of take for granted that we know what we're doing. Most of us know what we're doing. And so that's one side of the support, but we also do our community-based support as well. So when we're talking about skill development, we're talking about the skills to be able to go out and do the grocery shopping, to be able to go and feel comfortable and confident to order at a cafe, to go in even something as simple as getting a coffee. So our individual skills can be either in home or in community, but every one of our participants has got an individualized plan around what their goals are and what they want to be able to do at the end of their support with us. We also have counselling support. So we do counselling through NDIS funding, but alternatively, we also do private counselling as well. So we have Nicole that is our counsellor at the moment, and then I'm doing fortnightly Thursdays for counselling. Our counselling services for our private paying clients, we have really tried to look at the financial situation that everybody's in at the moment. So we have a concession that's running at the moment that's a significantly reduced price for counselling services. And we're also looking at different grants and different funding opportunities to be able to lower that cost even more, because we really want mental health support to be accessible to everybody that needs it. We have our training and development program, which we will go into a little bit later. We also have our community initiative, so our not-for-profit side of our business. So we like to collaborate with other organisations and just find gaps in our community, so needs that our community members aren't able to access at the moment, needs that they have, and find a way to fill that gap. So whether that be collaborating with organisations on accessing grants or funding, whether that being using our counselling services for, an area where another organisation might recognise there's a gap in that. We are open to any sort of collaboration and working together with any organizations in our community that have that same value and that same ethic as us around just really wanting to build skill and knowledge and capacity for those in our local community. We have done some community initiatives that are more charity based. So we ran a free Christmas lunch. We've done that for 2 years now. And that was essentially targeting anyone in the community that had nowhere to go for Christmas or was a little bit isolated, or just for people in the community that maybe just wanted to gather with other people for the day. And we were really lucky. We had a huge support from our local businesses that helped us to be able to do that. So initiatives like that are things that we would like to keep running. So we would like to make those yearly events. At the moment, we're doing a lot around suicide awareness and being able to target in on that area in our community as well. So our community initiatives are quite broad. We definitely source gaps and we really just turn that towards wherever there's a gap in the space at the moment and see how we can work with other people and other organizations to fill them. So at the moment, we have availability in some of our services. So counselling, so Nicole has some availability in her counselling schedule. So we're definitely open to any referrals that come through as far as looking for a counsellor that can work with NDIS participants, and then also in our support services as well. So we've just taken on another staff member in our support services who has both disability and mental health background. So we definitely can support those services as well, or any participants that are looking for some support. So that's a little bit around Changing Tide and a little bit of our background and what we've been doing. I'm going to hand over to Naomi, and Naomi is going to run through our training and development skills program. This is a new program that's come on board, but something that we just find fits into our ethos so much around that education and around that skill development. So I'll hand it over to Naomi.
Thanks, Kat, and thank you for having me online today to promote the work that I'm doing through Changing Tides in regards to training and education. I guess a little bit about me. I've been in the training and education space as a health promotion officer for over 16 years now, and I have been an adult educator, training and assessor for well over a decade. I guess in my educational experience, I have developed a little bit of a passion around working for people with disability and mental health, because I find that quite often they have missed out on those educational opportunities, either through schooling, which is where a lot of people get their education from, or they may have been in situations where their parents and carers haven't felt comfortable to deliver information and education around particular topics, especially when it comes to things like, puberty and sexual health. And unfortunately, for a long time, people living with disability in our society, either physical, intellectual, or indeed both, have very much been othered. And this sense of what level of information and education is appropriate. They've been viewed, when it comes to sexual and reproductive health, as either being asexual, not wanting to be engaged in sex or relationships at all, or hypersexualized and having this fixation on sex and sexual behaviors. And we in fact know that people living with disability are in fact like their peers without disability, in the sense that they have those sexual thoughts feelings and desires, and that holding back that information and education can sometimes be more problematic than if that information was provided in the same way as their peers. So very much advocate for all people to receive information and education. And when we think about education as a human right and we base that right there, I think that just highlights even more the importance of getting this information across to all members of our community, but especially those who experience disability and may have missed out on these opportunities elsewhere. So with that in mind, and with understanding some of those gaps that you spoke about before in terms of, service, but also knowledge, Changing Tides have developed 6 learning modules. I will run through each of them individually in terms of topics. So I'll introduce the topics first. I'll let you know what the sessions would look like, and then I'll go back and break down each of the actual topics and let you know what it is that we would be covering in each of those sessions. So the 6 topics that we're covering at the moment are healthy relationships, communication and helping people to find their voice, self-esteem and values, puberty and development, sexual and reproductive health, and a really big one is online safety, especially around scams, but also potentially that online space to socialise and to meet other people. So when somebody engages in a training and education session at Changing Tide, they can choose either one of those topic modules, they can choose several of them, or in fact, they can choose all of them. It's entirely up to the individual and what their needs are at that particular moment. Each of the topic areas consists of 6 sessions. So the format is the same regardless of the topic that is chosen. So the first session is used as an assessment session. I will work with the individual to kind of understand where they're at currently, like what information do they already know about the topic, assess what their learning style is, or what their preference for learning is, and help to understand how I'm best going to be able to serve them in terms of getting the information across. The last session is a wrap-up session where we recap on key points that have been given throughout the topic, and I would like to work with the individual to develop a list of those key points so that they can then take that away with them after the session, and then they've got that to refer back to over time. Those 4 sessions that are happening in between the first and the last are information driven and focused on the topic, and as I said, given where the individual is currently at, where they would like to be and how we get them there. So those sessions are going to include things like obviously delivering the information and education, where possible using things like models or online videos, worksheets or meaningful resources to help engage them in the learning style that best suits them. And I'm a really big believer in also using parallel practice. So where possible, being able to engage the participant to put the skills and knowledge that they've learned into practice before then going out into the world, with that information and education behind them. So what I'd like to do now is just speak about each of the topics individually, just to give you a little bit more idea about what you could expect if a participant were to engage in that particular session. So first and foremost, communication. So I believe that communication and finding one's voice, whether that be a physical voice or a community voice, is so incredibly important, because for a long time, people living with disability or with mental health, as I said before, have been othered or can quite often be very vulnerable and marginalised within our society. And they don't always necessarily know how to advocate for themselves and for their needs. So I think being able to look at communication styles, I know that sometimes people can become very passive, and as humans, a lot of us are people pleasers, and particularly people living with disability can very easily just give in to the yes, without necessarily feeling like they can stand their ground and advocate for themselves and have their opinions or their voice heard and respected as well. So the communication module will help people better understand what those communication styles are, hopefully getting them to work towards being an assertive communicator. So practicing things like those I statements. When you do X, I feel blah, and what I would like is. So some real conscious practice around becoming an assertive communicator, but also letting the individual know what their rights are when it comes to their communication and having those needs met. So that's the communication module in a nutshell. Videos are often a really good way to be able to demonstrate these communication styles. There are quizzes that people can do to see what their communication style is, and I would be able to then work with them to better advocate for themselves, which I think is so incredibly important for the most vulnerable and marginalised within our community. Following on from that, I think self-esteem and values is incredibly important. And we talk about these types of things as building blocks to healthy relationships. And I'll talk about healthy relationships separately in a moment. But with self-esteem and values, it can be really hard for somebody to identify things that they like about themselves or to talk about themselves positively in a humble way. Kat mentioned before the values of changing tide, which, you know, I'm so strongly aligned to as well, but working with an individual to identify what their own values are and how are those values serving them throughout their life, either in a work capacity or with their family or their friends. Like, are those values serving them across all aspects of their life? Some people will automatically know what their values and morals in life are. For other people, it is a little bit more challenging. And I suppose when we're thinking about the group of clientele who we're quite often working with in terms of those young to middle adult, children and young people take those values from their parents or carers quite often. And so they're moving into this stage of their life where they're like, actually, I have a little bit of freedom around my own values and my own morals. And that starts to be shaped and changed by different interactions, either in the workplace or with peers and friends. So it's allowing them to explore those own values and not necessarily have to continue aligning with those values that they may have taken on from their family or friends in the past. So self-esteem and values, lots of activities, especially around self-esteem, being able to identify themselves as a whole person and, you know, elements of their life that they're really, you know, happy and positive about, or elements of their life that perhaps they would like to work upon, and ways that we can strengthen that self-esteem. Somebody with positive self-esteem is then far more likely to find themselves in a healthy relationship. So I'll move on to talking about healthy relationships now. So healthy relationships is a standalone topic. And when we talk about relationships, what we're really referring to here is connections. So a lot of people just think about relationships as being those intimate or romantic relationships that they might have with a partner. But I like to think about relationships more broadly. So if we talk about relationships as connections, they're connections that they might have with parents, carers, family members. They might have those connections with their support workers, with their friends and their peers. They may have different connections with people in like a workplace or a social setting. So it's helping people to understand things like safe spaces when it comes to relationships. It's helping to understand what a healthy relationship looks like versus an unhealthy relationship, and really touching on some of those cornerstones such as respect and communication in those relationships, and obviously touching on, you know, some of the aspects of unhealthy relationships around abuse. And that's not just physical or sexual abuse, but that can also be verbal abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse. So it's really opening people up to, if I was in a relationship, what kind of relationship do I want to be in? And helping them to understand, I don't necessarily know what I want in a relationship, but based on past experiences, I know what I don't want in a relationship. So again, the use of videos, the use of resources, working with the client individually to step them through, you know, what their healthy relationship might look like, what the qualities of a relationship is that they like. And as I said, to talk about them as connections. And, you know, some people may have the end goal of wanting to be in an intimate or physical relationship with someone, a romantic relationship, and that's fantastic. For the other people, it's more just those social connections. So depending on where they're at, the relationships that they're currently in, just looking at how we can make those relationships more positive. A part of that will also be talking about consent. And when we talk about consent, a lot of the times people refer to consent or think automatically about consent in the sexual sense, like giving permission to somebody to perform sexual acts against you. But in fact, we're practicing consent in our daily lives all the time without necessarily knowing that we're doing it. So every time we sign a document, or our carer or parent signs a document on our behalf, they're giving permission for something to happen. So using that parallel practice, using that life-based skill, that daily skill, can then help to better translate that information into then, say, a sexual consent situation. So consent is a really big part of that as well. We then move into, I suppose, some of our more bodily topics, and puberty and development, I believe, is a really important one. So when working with a participant around puberty and development, obviously people start to go through puberty. We're seeing females or people with a uterus as young as 8 start to go through puberty these days. For a male or person with testes, that might be between the ages of 11 to 13. We are starting to see it sooner. So that education becomes incredibly important at a younger age. But we can't assume that our participants have received that educational information at all throughout their life. And so what I've seen in the past in some of this work, particularly with those living with intellectual disability, is that they've gone through puberty and they have all of these bodily changes and they don't necessarily understand why that is. And it's because they haven't been provided with that education and information. So you may have a person with a uterus, a female in their 20s, that's been menstruating for many years, and they don't actually understand why it is that they menstruate or why they get a period. I think the education is incredibly important because it helps to normalize. Like, this happens for everybody. And, you know, we all go through these stages of mood change and physical change with puberty and development. And it's this sense of, it's not just, it's happening to you. And sometimes if we even reflect back on our own puberty and development experiences, it can be that, what's happening to me? Am I going crazy? I'm having these thoughts, or I'm really moody. Why is this happening? Those of us with the educational information can then go, oh, okay, I know that I'm moody because of my hormones. Those that have not had that education don't have that understanding about those changes. And so it can become quite problematic. And again, it comes down to that othering that I mentioned before. So the puberty and development module or topic is obviously really relevant to those who are actually going through it, but it is a really core topic, I believe, to talking about better understanding our bodies and how they work. And then I think that leads into them being able to talk about the sexual and reproductive aspects of an individual's life. But the puberty and development modules for both male person with testes, female person with uterus, or however they identify in terms of gender, we'll look at those bodily changes, a focus on their particular gender identification, but I am also a really big believer in educating across all genders. So you understand what other people are also going through, not just yourself. So there will be at least a half session focus on the other gender and what their experiences are, so that they have that information and education. The use of models and anatomically correct diagrams. And I'm a really big believer in the correct anatomical use of language. So this is one that would, I guess, come with a little bit of a caveat to say, I will be discussing breasts, bottoms, penises, and vaginas as part of that session. Using correct anatomical language is incredibly important, and we encourage that from birth. So I would be modeling that language because that language is appropriate. It's not wrong, it's not naughty, it's not disgusting, it is normal. And I really like to be able to model that language and the ease of that use as well. So as I said, using anatomically correct diagrams and models, I will help to explain those bodily changes and what is happening, and yeah, why they may be feeling certain ways. Which leads us really nicely into talking about the sexual and reproductive health unit. So when it comes to sexual and reproductive health, as I said before, unfortunately, people living with disability, either physical, intellectual, or both, have been othered in this space for quite some time. And parents and carers have sometimes been a little reluctant to provide the information to the people in their care, for fear of what they will do with that information. As I mentioned before, sometimes people with disability are seen as being asexual, not having any interest in sex at all, or being hypersexualized and having a fixation on sex and sexual behaviors. But in fact, for most people living with a disability, they're the same as their peers. They have these sexual thoughts, feelings, and desires. And when information and education is provided in an appropriate way, we're far less likely to see those hypersexualized behaviors. The other thing to keep in mind here is that, unfortunately, people with disability are more likely to be perpetrators of or victims of unwanted sexual contact or sexual violence. And I honestly believe that a lot of that comes down to the fact that there has been a lack of information or education around things like sexual consent, what it means to be in a relationship with somebody, and that you do have these sexual thoughts, feelings, and desires, and there are ways that we can deal with those in appropriate ways. So at an individual level, it's talking about things like health and hygiene as part of puberty, but also sexual and reproductive health. It's talking about masturbation. Masturbation is a very safe way to explore those sexual desires that you have. And again, we need to normalize those behaviors. I suppose for a long time, those behaviors have been normalized in males or person with testes, but haven't necessarily been normalized in females or a person with a uterus. So allowing an individual to explore their own sexual pleasures through masturbation. Um, Talking about if they were in a romantic relationship with somebody and they were wanting to engage in sex, obviously talking about protection to avoid both sexually transmissible infections and or an unplanned or unintended pregnancy. Talking about contraception methods to avoid those unplanned pregnancies as well. So they're the kinds of things that they could expect to learn through that sexual and reproductive health unit. Again, the use of videos, worksheets, really getting the individual to focus on what their needs are or what their particular interest areas are and addressing those in an appropriate age and stage developmental way. The last of our modules is online safety, and I think this is an incredibly important one for everybody in society, especially at the moment where I feel like every other day we're getting 100 text messages or emails with scammers or phishers wanting information. So the online safety module actually has a look at a couple of components. So first of all, it is about that, how do you protect yourself if you are in that online space? So working with the participant to identify online spaces that they're currently in. That might include things like social media profiles, even, when you sign up to get the emails in the shops, when you sign up to their shopping plans and things like that. Just thinking about that digital presence and where that information is going. So working with a participant to help them identify ways that they can stay safer online. I'm a really big believer in the use of the fantastic resources from the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner. So there's some videos there that are specific to people, particularly with intellectual disability, and some worksheets. That hands-on practical stuff, having a look at some online scams and seeing if they're able to identify what could be a scam versus what's not, how to best protect their information, the kinds of things that they can do online versus some of the things that they should be avoiding in terms of the giving out of information. And the second component of that online safety will be having a look at things like apps that they might be associated with. So some of those might include things like dating apps. And if an individual was interested in that, we could look at how they could potentially draft a dating profile in terms of, what their interests are, what their hobbies are, what it is that they're looking for a partner, and what it is that they're looking for in a relationship. Just so that they're more familiar with that online space. And I guess some of the advantages and disadvantages of being in that online space versus meeting somebody in person as well. So in a nutshell, that's the modules that we are offering. We're really excited here at Changing Tide to have developed these packages and to be able to offer them to individuals or to participants. Aside from that, though, we're really interested in working with organisations as well. So particularly those working in support, or you may be working in, say, a group home situation. We're really interested in working with yourself as workers as well. You know the people you're supporting best. They have a really good relationship and connection with you. So they're far more likely to open up and discuss some of these things with you. And if you have increased your capacity or your skill or knowledge in these areas, you're then better to provide this information or education to them as well. So while we're very open to working with individuals and participants, we're also really open to working with organisations, either through group training sessions as part of your staff meetings, if it's in response to a particular incident. So I've worked with group homes before where there may have been an incident of, say, a genital exposure in a public area within the group home, and they're wanting to work with the individual to better understand that behaviour and the difference between public behaviour and private behaviour. So we're really happy to help with incident management. But more importantly, as I said, we're really keen to work with you to have that preventative information and education, so that, if you're having a general discussion with a participant and one of these topics comes up, you at least have a sort of baseline level of information that you can engage them with and support them through then either referring to ourselves for more in-depth ongoing sessions, or having some really key websites or resources that you can go to help those conversations as well. So more than happy to work with individual participants, but also very happy to work with organisations and services as well. And yeah, look forward to where this can go in 2024. Thanks,
Awesome.
Kat.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I hope that's given everybody a little bit of an understanding of changing tide and the things that we're passionate about, the way that we want to work in our community, and the different services that we have on offer. Because like I said previously, we really want to identify these gaps. So we want to find these spaces where there's people that are missing out on services, or there's no services that are tailored towards those needs. And we want to make sure that everybody in our community has access to the knowledge they need and the skills they need to be able to live their healthiest life and really look after their well-being. Um, Once again, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad that you found the time to be able to come along today and really find out what was happening in your community. And if at any time there's something that you feel like Changing Tide might be able to connect with you about, if you feel like a little bit of a strong link to our ethos and the way that we work, absolutely reach out. We would love to get in contact and see how we can work together to be able to really move things along in our Bay and Basin community. Thank you so much.